My mother-in-law wired $50,000 to my husband's mistress and canceled my birthday party. What I did over the next 8 months shocked New York. My mother-in-law called off my birthday party without a word to me, then wired the entire $50,000 we had budgeted for the celebration directly into the bank account of my husband's mistress, the very same Patricia he had sworn was just an auditor from the IRS. When I finally confronted Eleanor Sterling, the matriarch who controls half the Manhattan skyline, her dismissal was icy and swift. "Nobody cares about adult birthdays," she said, adding that I should be thinking about investments instead. Later that night, during a tense family dinner, I went to the kitchen for napkins and overheard the venomous words they whispered about me when they thought I was out of earshot. Poor thing, so naive. She has no idea. I filed away that humiliation like a lawyer archiving evidence, because that's exactly what I am. A Harvard Law Honors graduate who had just stumbled upon a billion-dollar corruption scheme involving my husband's entire family. Over the next 8 months, I channeled my pain into a revenge plot so intricate it would shock the writers of a prestige HBO drama. And it all culminated at my mother-in-law's 65th birthday gala, where I projected every document, every bribe, and every fraudulent transaction onto a giant screen at the most exclusive hotel in New York City, right in front of 200 distinguished guests, and quite conveniently, the FBI agents I had personally invited. There are certain moments when life makes it clear that the universe possesses a uniquely cruel sense of humor. My moment arrived on a bright Wednesday afternoon, delivered via an email from Park Avenue Events with the subject line, "Confirmation of cancellation, birthday celebration." I stared at my phone's screen, feeling as if it had physically slapped me across the face. A cancellation? What cancellation? I dropped my leather briefcase onto the center table, the absurdly expensive glass one Joseph insisted we buy because it matched our minimalist aesthetic. My finger trembled as I dialed the event planner. A polite voice on the other end confirmed that yes, the reservation had been terminated 2 days prior by Mrs. Eleanor Sterling, and I'm terribly sorry, but the refund would only be partial, as stipulated in the signed contract. Have you ever felt like you're an unwitting actor in a terrible movie that's already in production? The cake. Oh God, the cake. I had commissioned a masterpiece designed to look like a lawyer's briefcase, with fondant details replicating every single diploma and career achievement. It cost what a kidney might fetch on the black market, but it was meant to be the perfect centerpiece for my 33rd birthday. "The cake is non-refundable, ma'am, as it's already in production," the coordinator informed me, using that gentle, pitying tone one reserves for a child who just found out Santa Claus isn't real. How dare my mother-in-law do this without even speaking to me? And more importantly, why? The universe has a funny way of revealing inconvenient truths. They always surface at the worst possible time. I was slumped on the sofa, nursing a glass of red wine, that Napa Cabernet I save for emotional emergencies, trying to digest the news of my canceled party when my phone buzzed. An email from Sterling Enterprises, subject, "Wire transfer receipt. Confidential." It had probably been sent to me by mistake. I am one of the company's attorneys, after all. I opened it without much thought. I almost choked on my wine when I saw the amount, $50,000, exactly, to the dollar, the budget we had allocated for my party. The transfer had been executed that morning from the corporate account, with a description that was crystal clear. Birthday gift authorized by Mrs. Eleanor Sterling. For a fleeting moment, I might have thought it was a surprise for me, had the beneficiary's name not been right there in bold text. Patricia Collins. I took a deep breath. Patricia. The IRS auditor I had accidentally seen in old photos on Joseph's phone. My favorite mug, a delicate porcelain one with blue and gold details given to me by my first major client, slipped from my grasp and shattered on the marble floor. It's strange how the mind works in moments of crisis. My first thought wasn't about the betrayal or the humiliation, but rather, how am I going to tell Maria I broke the mug she loves to polish? Maria, our housekeeper for 3 years, who seemingly knew more about the state of my marriage than I did. I only realized I was crying when a tear splashed onto my phone's screen, distorting Patricia's name into a watercolor blur. If you've never heard of the Sterling family in New York, you either live under a rock or just arrived from another planet. Sterling Enterprises is the force behind half the gleaming skyscrapers that define the Manhattan skyline, those glass towers where executives pretend to work 14-hour days. My mother-in-law, Eleanor Sterling, rules this empire with an iron fist cloaked in a Prada glove. At 64, her brown hair is religiously dyed every 15 days, and she exclusively wears Italian-tailored suits, even at a Hamptons barbecue. Their mansion on the Upper East Side is precisely what you'd imagine, a bizarre fusion of immense wealth and questionable architectural taste. Greek columns flank the entrance. Are we in ancient Greece or New York City? And the main hall is filled with expensive paintings no one truly appreciates, all recommended by the family's art consultant. The worst offense is the massive portrait of Eleanor and her husband, Arthur, painted 20 years ago, where they look like pale, joyless European aristocrats. Arthur, for his part, is a ghost who materializes for important dinners before vanishing to oversee international projects. By international projects, everyone understands he means the second family he discreetly maintains in London. Everyone knows, including Eleanor, but no one ever speaks of it. It's the kind of secret that is universally known, yet collectively ignored, much like the fact that the family's fortune originated from questionable land deals during New York's mid-century redevelopment boom. When I married Joseph, I signed an invisible contract. In exchange for a powerful surname and a guaranteed career path, I would pretend not to see the skeletons in their walk-in closets. Now, sitting among the shards of my favorite mug, I wondered if the price had been far too high. Joseph Sterling possesses the kind of handsome that looks engineered in a lab. Perfectly coiffed black hair, teeth aligned with military precision, courtesy of 5 years of braces in his teens, and a physique maintained by daily sessions at the most expensive gym in Manhattan. Our first encounter was during a contentious lawsuit where his company was being sued over irregularities in a major real estate deal. I was representing the other side, the buyers, and my initial impression was that he was the most charming jackass I had ever met. Who could have possibly predicted we'd be married 3 years later? The irony is that the moments I truly fell for him were when the cracks appeared in his polished, successful playboy facade. Like the time he admitted, after 3 dirty martinis, that his greatest fear was waking up one day to the realization that his only role at the company was being the owner's son. "Marina, sometimes I feel like a complete fraud," he confessed, his gaze fixed on the cityscape from a chic rooftop bar in Soho. In that instant, I saw something real behind the Ray-Ban sunglasses and the Rolex watch. An insecure man begging to be loved for who he was, not for his last name. What I haven't mentioned yet is that Joseph calls his mother every single day. Every single day. I am not exaggerating. Once, during our honeymoon in Santorini, he woke up at 5 a.m. local time to call Eleanor and ask if he should wear the blue or the white linen shirt to dinner that evening. At our own wedding, he sent her 3 different photos of his tuxedo for her to approve before he would walk down the aisle. I should have recognized then that I wasn't just marrying a man. I was marrying into a completely dysfunctional family system. But love is blind, deaf, and, as it turns out, a total idiot. If there's one thing I learned early in life, it's that being exceptionally good at what you do doesn't always win you friends. I graduated first in my class at Harvard Law School, won every moot court competition, and finished with high honors. My peers called me the machine, and it wasn't exactly a term of endearment. When I joined the prestigious firm Lockwood & Pierce at 24, I shattered the record for billable hours in my first quarter. By 30, I was the youngest partner in the firm's history. You know those people who are just irritatingly efficient? Yeah, that's me. Marrying into the Sterling family, however, felt like landing on an alien planet where none of my accomplishments mattered. I tried to learn golf to please Eleanor and broke the windshield of the instructor's golf cart, twice, in one afternoon. I tried to show an interest in fine wines and ended up confusing a vintage Bordeaux with that boxed wine I drink on Fridays. I even took etiquette classes, but I still don't know which fork is for the salad, and frankly, I've given up trying to figure it out. It's as if there's a secret handbook titled How to Be a Sterling that was distributed to everyone but me. The unspoken agreement was straightforward. I would pretend to adore the endless dinners filled with vapid conversations about their new resort in the Caribbean or the recently opened golf course. In return, Eleanor would pretend I was worthy of a seat at her Louis XV dining table. "Marina has so much potential," she would tell her friends, flashing a smile that never reached her eyes. What she truly meant was, "It's a shame she comes from a family with no pedigree, but at least she's intelligent and pretty." I once overheard Eleanor explaining to a friend that my family was of humble but very hard-working origins, as if she were describing a particularly touching charity project. You know that feeling where you just want the ground to swallow you whole? That was it. My discovery of Patricia's existence happened in the most cliché way imaginable: an Instagram notification. Joseph rarely used the platform, so when his username popped up as having liked a photo from Patty C. Official at 3:27 a.m. on a Tuesday, my spousal radar went off like a 5-alarm fire. The photo in question featured a woman in her mid-30s with garishly dyed red hair posing in a gold lame swimsuit by a pool. Not a big deal, you might think, except Joseph had told me he was at a business conference in Austin, Texas that day. "Who's this Patricia?" I asked casually over breakfast 3 days later, after finally mustering the courage. Joseph choked on his orange juice with such cinematic flair that I was almost impressed by his dramatic instincts. "She's an auditor from the IRS," he replied with a forced naturalness. "I met her at a tax compliance seminar." "Why?" "Why? Because you were liking photos of her in a bikini in the middle of the night, you moron." But of course, I didn't say that. I just smiled and said I was curious, while mentally cross-referencing his calendar for any mention of this supposed tax compliance seminar. Over the next 3 months, I did what any lawyer with access to her husband's corporate emails would do. I investigated. I uncovered meetings scheduled at odd hours, restaurant receipts for 2, on days he was supposedly at business lunches, and the most damning piece of evidence: an investment condo the company had purchased in the meatpacking district, which, strangely, never appeared on any official reports. The cherry on top was finding a receipt for a tattoo. Yes, a tattoo that Joseph had gotten on his back. My husband, who had a crippling fear of needles and nearly fainted during his last flu shot. The tattoo? A small 4-leaf clover, identical to the one Patricia had on her wrist. Subtle, Joseph. Real subtle. Working as a lawyer for your husband's family company is like navigating a minefield while blindfolded. On one hand, you have access to information no one else does. On the other, you see things you definitely aren't supposed to. That's how I gradually uncovered the financial irregularities at Sterling Enterprises. At first, I noticed contracts with bizarre clauses, then payments to consultants who seemed to be ghosts, and finally, a complex web of offshore shell corporations that moved money like an elaborate card game. And at the center of it all, like a skillful spider, was Eleanor. During board meetings, I would watch how she manipulated Joseph. "Darling, why don't you present that report we prepared?" she'd say with that rehearsed smile. The report that she had prepared, that she wanted to present, but that would bear his name, so that if anything went wrong, the blame would fall squarely on him. Joseph, ever desperate for his mother's approval, would agree with enthusiasm. I would sit there, smiling and taking notes like the good daughter-in-law and corporate counsel I was supposed to be, all while mentally tallying the number of fiscal violations I could spot on each presentation slide. The worst, however, were the business dinners at the mansion, where everyone pretended that everything was perfectly, terrifyingly normal. Business tycoons, politicians, and even a judge or two could be seen sipping French champagne while discussing urban development opportunities, which, translated from their coded language, really meant figuring out how to bend zoning laws and fast-track approvals for their latest ventures. Eleanor glided through the room like a political first lady, her comments always precise and her smiles perfectly calculated. "Marina is just so dedicated," she'd say, placing a hand on my shoulder with enough force to leave nail marks. "So young and already a partner at one of the top firms in the country." What she conveniently failed to mention was that she had personally pressured the senior partners into promoting me, ensuring she had someone trustworthy handling the family's legal affairs. The Thursday night dinner at the Sterling Mansion was a tradition as sacrosanct as a Swiss bank account. Every Thursday, at 8 p.m. sharp, Joseph and I were expected to be seated at that table, regardless of work commitments, exhaustion, or, God forbid, a desire to stay home and watch Netflix. It was on one of those Thursdays, while Arthur was recounting for the 1,000th time his story of how I saved that project in Dubai, a tale we all knew was at least partially fabricated, that Eleanor cleared her throat and made her announcement. About Marina's birthday party. I froze, my fork hovering halfway to my mouth. My party was scheduled for 3 weeks from then, at the most sought-after venue in Manhattan, with 150 confirmed guests, including partners from my firm and several important clients. I believe it's a dreadful waste of money, she continued, taking a sip of champagne as if she were merely commenting on the weather. We're not children, dear. Extravagant adult birthdays are rather gauche. Joseph choked on his wine and devolved into a coughing fit, while I maintained a frozen smile, my mind vividly picturing the trajectory of the foie gras terrine as it collided with my mother-in-law's perfectly coiffed hair. The money can be put to much better use, Eleanor went on, completely ignoring her son, who was still gasping for air. I've already taken the liberty of canceling the reservation. Taken the liberty? Taken the liberty? It was my birthday, paid for with the money that Joseph and I had set aside. I opened my mouth to protest, but Eleanor raised a hand in an imperial gesture that clearly communicated, "This discussion is over. At your age, Marina, it's time to think about investments, not parties." By at your age, she meant 33, practically a teenager by sterling standards, where no one retires before 90. Lying in bed that night, with Joseph snoring beside me, I realized I wasn't just furious. I was at war. And in any war, information is the most powerful weapon of all. I cycled through the 5 stages of grief in the days that followed, but not in the way a therapist would describe. My denial stage lasted for exactly 47 minutes, the time it took me to triple-check our bank accounts and confirm that yes, the party funds had been wired as a birthday gift to Patricia. Anger came next, manifesting spectacularly when I, accidentally, knocked over the hideous bronze sculpture Eleanor had given us as a wedding present. Do you know the sound a heavy metal object makes when it hits a marble floor at 3 a.m.? It's surprisingly therapeutic. Bargaining was the most pathetic phase. I spent hours trying to convince myself that maybe, just maybe, there was a perfectly reasonable explanation for everything. Perhaps Patricia truly was an IRS agent helping the family with a legitimate issue. Perhaps the wire transfer was an advance for some completely normal, legal professional service. Perhaps I was overreacting, turning a series of coincidences into a grand conspiracy. It's astonishing how the human mind will twist itself into knots to avoid the obvious, isn't it? It's like seeing a giant neon sign flashing, "Your husband is a cheater," and thinking, am I interpreting that message correctly? Depression hit me like a freight train on Sunday. I found myself in my pajamas at 4 p.m., eating ice cream straight from the pint and binge-watching classic rom-coms while inadvertently creating a Spotify playlist titled Songs for Plotting Revenge. And the worst part? I accidentally shared the playlist with all of my professional contacts. That included a 70-year-old federal judge, Judge Wallace, who texted me to ask if I was okay and to recommend his therapist. Acceptance, however, didn't arrive as resignation. It came as cold, hard determination. I was about to show Eleanor Sterling that underestimating a Harvard Law Honors graduate was the biggest mistake she had ever made. The only question was, where to begin? They say the best ideas strike at the most unexpected moments. For me, it happened while I was stuck in our building's elevator with Beatrice Gable, the 68-year-old building manager who knows every secret about every resident. Seriously, this woman should work for the CIA. We were both returning from the grocery store, I with a pathetic bag containing 1 frozen pizza and a bottle of cheap wine, she with enough groceries to feed a small army, when the elevator jolted and shuddered to a halt between the 5th and 6th floors. "Good heavens!" Beatrice cried out, frantically mashing the emergency button. "It's always something in this building. When I worked for Sterling Enterprises, this never would have happened." Eleanor kept everything running like a Swiss watch. Wait a minute. She worked for my mother-in-law? My lawyer brain immediately kicked into high gear. While we calmly pretended we weren't trapped in a potentially lethal metal box, I learned that Beatrice had been Eleanor Sterling's executive secretary for 17 years. 17 years. I know all the skeletons in that family's closet, she said, fanning herself with a magazine. If I ever opened my mouth, half of Manhattan would have a heart attack. By the time the firefighters pried the doors open 40 minutes later, I knew about the hidden safe behind the painting in the mansion's study, about the documents Eleanor kept in a locked red folder in her desk, and about how Arthur had bribed city officials to get zoning variances to build on protected land. I feigned a fainting spell as the elevator doors opened, partly for dramatic effect, and partly because I had no idea how to end that conversation without arousing suspicion. "My goodness, the poor thing is unwell," Beatrice exclaimed as I was helped into the lobby. Right there, lying on the reception couch with a firefighter checking my blood pressure, I knew one thing for sure. The universe was giving me an opening, and I was not about to waste it. Joseph came home late that night, the result of a meeting with suppliers, he claimed, though he smelled faintly of a woman's perfume that was definitely not mine. I feigned sleep, waiting until his snores filled the room before I crept out of bed. His laptop sat on the living room table, unlocked, an unforgivable mistake for a man with secrets. What I found left me breathless. An entire folder of emails exchanged with Patricia. The deposit was made as arranged, one read. Another said, "My mother is unaware you have copies of the documents." But the one that cut the deepest was this: "Marina doesn't suspect a thing. She's smart, but far too naive." Naive? Me? The woman who had once convinced a notoriously ruthless judge to reverse a decision in record time? The professional whose clients called her the shark in heels? The indignation was so sharp I almost woke Joseph up just to inform him of exactly how not naive I was. Instead, I kept digging. I unearthed emails discussing an ongoing tax audit, wire transfers to obscure shell accounts, and then, bingo, a message from Eleanor to Patricia mentioning that the arrangement must be kept in absolute secrecy. I have already processed the payment as we discussed. So my birthday party had been canceled to fund a bribe? What a lovely gift. Caught between fury and vindication, a small voice in my head, the voice of my inner legal strategist, began to speak louder. "Marina, you now possess enough evidence to bring down an entire empire." I slowly closed the laptop, my mind torn between professional ethics, report the crimes immediately, and a visceral desire for revenge, use the information to orchestrate their downfall. On a napkin from the sushi delivery Joseph had ordered earlier, I started a list of pros and cons. Under cons, I wrote, "Possibly illegal, definitely unethical, could end my career." Under pros, I wrote just one word: justice. I stared at the list for a long time, the word justice blinking in my mind like a neon sign. Would you have done any different in my place? The next morning I woke up a different person. I put on my best power suit, the navy blue one I reserve for intimidating opposing counsel, applied flawless makeup, and even wore the pearl necklace Eleanor had given me for Christmas, to try and elevate your style, dear. In the mirror, I practiced my most convincing fake smile. I mentally christened it Operation Sweet Deception as Joseph watched me, confused over breakfast. "You seem different," he commented, trying to place what had changed. "I'm just happy," I replied with a shrug. "After all, your mother saved me the trouble of planning a party. Isn't that wonderful?" The hardest part was calling Eleanor and offering to help her organize some of the company's documents. I could practically hear her eyebrows shooting up on the other end of the line. "What a sudden interest, Marina," she said, suspicion dripping from every syllable. I improvised, telling her I wanted to better understand the family business, perhaps even take on greater responsibilities soon. I mentioned an online MBA I was taking, a lie, and how much I admired her strategic vision, an even bigger lie. It worked like a charm. If there's one thing Eleanor loves, it's flattery. "Come tomorrow at 2, she said finally, "but don't touch anything without my supervision." The irony of the situation was not lost on me as I drove to the mansion the next day, a tiny recording device hidden in my purse and my phone's camera ready. I was about to spy on my own family using the very skills I once used to defend them. Guilt gnawed at me for approximately 3 seconds until I remembered the email. She's smart, but far too naive. I parked in the circular driveway, applying another layer of red lipstick, my personal armor. One of the housekeepers opened the door, and I stepped inside as if I were stepping onto a battlefield. In a way, I was. Except this time, I wasn't fighting for Team Sterling. I was fighting against it. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for until I found it. Eleanor left me alone in her study for precisely 7 minutes to take an urgent call. Just enough time for me to quickly photograph the contents of a folder labeled Project Phoenix. Inside, I found documents that would make any district attorney weep with joy. Construction permits with clearly forged signatures, receipts for payments to a licensing consultant who just so happened to be the brother-in-law of the city's zoning commissioner, and detailed notes on which regulators were receiving kickbacks to expedite the process. Finding anything interesting? Eleanor's voice startled me so badly I almost dropped my phone. She was standing in the doorway, watching me with the eyes of a hawk. Just trying to understand the organization, I replied, my heart pounding in my throat. It's all so meticulous. She smiled, that cold smile that never reached her eyes. Organization is power, Marina. Whoever controls the paper, controls the narrative. Little did she know, I was about to hijack her precious narrative. When I left the mansion 3 hours later, my phone was full of evidence, and my mind was buzzing with increasingly audacious ideas. But the real shock came later that night. As I was combing through the files I had photographed, I found a reference to a second consultant, a Lauren Reed, who was married to Michael Reed, the head of the city's inspection department. A quick Instagram search revealed a stunning 28-year-old blonde, flaunting designer bags and international trips on a public servant's salary. Even more intriguing, in several photos, I spotted Joseph in the background, always casually present. 2 mistresses? Seriously? My husband couldn't even remember to buy milk when I asked, yet somehow he was managing a double life? There's a saying that to take down an empire, you need an army. I didn't have an army, but I had something better. Underestimated people with access to valuable information. First, I recruited Peter, my 22-year-old intern at the firm, a tech genius who seemed to have been born with a keyboard attached to his fingers. "You want me to do what?" he asked, nearly choking on his Red Bull when I laid out my plan. "It's not exactly illegal," I argued. "It's more like an unsanctioned internal audit." He adjusted his glasses, thinking. "So, like a corporate Edward Snowden? I'm in." Jessica was easier to convince. She's my best friend from law school and a renowned forensic accountant, possessing a unique talent for finding hidden money faster than a mom finds contraband candy in a toddler's backpack. "That snake of a mother-in-law of yours always looked at me like I was a cockroach in her soup," Jessica said while examining the documents I'd gathered. "And your husband? I always thought he had the face of someone who was no good." She was right, of course. Jessica is always right, which is infuriating 90% of the time, and incredibly useful the other 10%. With just a few clicks, she had already identified 3 separate shell corporations being used for money laundering. "Amateur hour," she muttered, referring to Eleanor. She didn't even bother to vary the registered addresses. The third member of our impromptu crew was the most unexpected. Anthony, the doorman at the Sterling Enterprises building for the last 27 years. A 65-year-old gentleman with an impressive mustache and a supernatural ability to know exactly who entered and exited the building, when, and most importantly, with whom. "Mrs. Sterling thinks I'm invisible," he told me over coffee at a corner diner. "But I know she meets with Councilman Thompson every Tuesday at 3 p.m., and it's never to talk politics, if you catch my drift." Anthony gave me a conspiratorial wink. Our new headquarters became Peter's tiny apartment in Hell's Kitchen, a space decorated exclusively with action figures and half-empty pizza boxes. There, surrounded by a plastic Spider-Man and a vintage Star Wars poster, we began to plot the downfall of the Sterling Empire. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be wearing a $15,000 Carolina Herrera gown, a gift from Eleanor, naturally, to eavesdrop on conversations at a charity gala, I would have laughed myself sick. Yet there I was, teetering on impossible heels, gliding through the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel as if I were the most carefree socialite in Manhattan. "Marina, darling, what a surprise to see you here," exclaimed Cecilia Astor, Eleanor's best friend, and a woman known for spreading gossip faster than a viral TikTok. You usually avoid these functions. I smiled, taking a sip of champagne. I'm trying to be more involved in the community, I replied sweetly. Eleanor has been such an inspiration. The following 3 weeks were an Oscar-worthy performance. I attended charity luncheons, golf tournaments, still terrible, still breaking things, and even bridge lessons, all to get closer to Eleanor's inner circle and gather more intel. The lowest point? When I accidentally spilled a glass of red wine on my mother-in-law's $20,000 white Chanel dress during a cocktail party. Oh my God, Eleanor, I am so sorry, I cried, dabbing at the stain with mineral water and only making it worse. She smiled that killer smile of hers. Don't you worry, dear. Accidents happen. Later, I overheard her in the powder room telling a friend, she's a walking disaster. Joseph could have done so much better. If only she knew that the accident had given me the perfect cover to slip a flash drive into her assistant's laptop while everyone was distracted by the drama. I was almost caught only once. I was trying to photograph documents in Joseph's home office when I heard him arrive home earlier than expected. In a blind panic, I dove into his walk-in closet, the very place he was heading to put away his suit jacket. I crouched between his Italian loafers, barely breathing, as he spoke on the phone. Patricia, I can't talk right now. Yes, she doesn't suspect a thing. The wire will go through tomorrow. When he finally left, I realized I had been contorted between shoeboxes for 40 minutes, and my left leg had gone completely numb. I tried to creep out of the closet, tripped over my own sleeping leg, and fell flat on my face, making a noise I'm sure was heard in the next building over. Marina, what are you doing on the floor of my closet? Joseph asked, walking back into the room. Yoga, I said without missing a beat. It's a new position. It's called downward-facing wife, looking for an earring. You're right. I skipped the subchapter, the art of making strategic friends. I'll write that missing part before continuing. I'd always heard that information is power, but I never fully understood the concept until my secret mission began. The trick wasn't just about collecting documents. It was about befriending the right people. I started with the obvious, Felipe, the bartender at the country club, that sacred ground where the Sterlings and their friends spoke freely, believing the staff was just moving furniture. You're not like them, ma'am, Felipe commented as he served me a sparkling water. I was on duty, after all. You treat us like people. A simple compliment that spoke volumes about my husband's family, didn't it? With a few generous tips and a genuine interest in his daughter who dreamed of going to law school. Yes, I offered to help her with her LSAT prep. Felipe became my eyes and ears at the club. Mr. Arthur met with that councilman again yesterday, he whispered one Tuesday. And Mrs. Sterling was furious when she found out. Seemingly trivial bits of information that, when pieced together, formed a revealing puzzle. It was like having an exclusive reality show about the rich and powerful, only I wasn't just watching, I was gathering evidence. Amanda, the receptionist at Sterling Enterprises, joined my small army after Eleanor publicly humiliated her for wearing an inappropriately red nail polish in a corporate setting. Seriously? In this day and age? I have access to everyone's calendars, Amanda explained, her eyes glinting with the unique desire for revenge that only a publicly shamed woman can understand. And then came the jackpot. Christina, Joseph's executive assistant for the past 8 years, who knew about every scheme, affair, and backroom deal. I always knew this house of cards would come down one day, she said, handing me a folder filled with copies of emails she never should have had. I just never imagined it would be you, Miss Sterling. I smiled, thinking how the most powerful people always make the same mistake. They forget that the invisible people are always watching. The Sterling Foundation for At-Risk Youth, read a tax shelter disguised as charity, was holding its annual gala. And guess who was invited to help with the organizing committee? That's right, your dedicated daughter-in-law. The event was being held at the mansion, which meant one thing: access to Eleanor's study, and finally, to that mysterious safe Beatrice had mentioned. I spent the entire week watching YouTube tutorials on how to crack a safe. Seriously, there's a tutorial for everything online, and practicing on an old jewelry box. Peter even lent me a stethoscope so I could listen for the tumblers to click, as if I were some professional jewel thief from an 80s movie. The night of the gala arrived, and I was a vision in an emerald green gown that had cost half a month's salary. "Why all the glamour?" Joseph asked, his eyes filled with suspicion. "It's just my mother's foundation gala," I said, adjusting his bow tie like the perfect wife I was pretending to be. "I want her to be proud of us," I replied with my most innocent smile. What he didn't know was that I had a modified tension wrench disguised as a bobby pin. "Thank you, Peter," and a pen-sized flashlight hidden in my clutch. Operation Wicked Witch's Vault was officially a go. During dinner, I waited for the perfect moment. When everyone was captivated by the charity auction, I slipped through the mansion's corridors like a ninja in stilettos and entered Eleanor's sacred study. I located the painting Beatrice had described, a ghastly portrait of Eleanor with her deceased father, and carefully lifted it from the wall. Voila! There was the safe. My hands trembled as I positioned the stethoscope and slowly turned the dial, straining to hear the tumblers fall into place. After 5 agonizing minutes, I heard footsteps in the hall. Pure panic set in. I slammed the painting back onto the wall, stumbling in the process and knocking over a vase, possibly antique, definitely priceless. The footsteps grew closer. In desperation, I grabbed the first excuse I could think of. I snatched an abandoned tray of escargots from a nearby table and emptied the entire thing down the front of my designer dress. When Eleanor opened the door, she found me covered in snails and garlic herb butter. "I was looking for the powder room," I moaned dramatically, "and just look what happened." She gave me a look that conveyed I was the most pathetic creature in the universe. Mission aborted, but at least my cover was intact. And you know the worst part? Escargot is mostly butter. That stain is never coming out. There comes a moment in every woman's life when she looks in the mirror and thinks, "Who the hell is that person?" Mine came on a rainy Tuesday as I stared at my own reflection in a storefront window on Madison Avenue. My hair was always pulled back in a severe bun. My clothes were always muted, neutral tones, and my heels were always an appropriate height. It was the perfect uniform for a sterling wife in training. On impulse, I walked into the most audacious boutique on the block. "I want something that makes me look dangerous," I announced to the sales associate, who raised her perfectly sculpted eyebrows. 2 hours and several maxed-out credit cards later, I emerged with a wardrobe I never would have dared to wear before, including a red dress that would make a bishop blush. The most surprising part? I loved the new version of me. I got highlights, started wearing red lipstick daily, not just for special occasions, and, to Eleanor's absolute horror, bought a leather jacket with silver studs. "Are you having some kind of crisis?" Joseph asked, clearly unnerved by my transformation. "An epiphany, actually," I replied, admiring my new red nails. The old Marina, the one who was always trying to please everyone, was officially retired. The new Marina, well, she had scores to settle. And the incredible thing was, the further I moved from the image the Sterlings had crafted for me, the more I reconnected with the person I truly was. My transformation wasn't just aesthetic. In a move that shocked even myself, I signed up for shooting lessons at a range just outside the city. "It's just a precaution," I explained to Jessica, who looked at me as if I'd announced I was becoming an astronaut. "Since when do you need a gun to sue someone?" She had a point, of course. Lawyers use words as weapons, not firearms. But there was something incredibly therapeutic about squeezing that trigger, picturing Eleanor's face on the paper target. By my 3rd lesson, I hit the bullseye 5 times in a row. "You're a natural," the instructor commented, impressed. I smiled, thinking I might have found my true calling, corporate vigilante. It felt as though every perfect shot was stealing my nerves for what was to come. And believe me, what was coming was big. Very big. I started with small acts of retribution, an appetizer for the main course I was preparing. At Eleanor's birthday luncheon, which, unlike mine, was celebrated with 80 of her closest friends at Daniel, I swapped the salt and sugar shakers in the mansion's kitchen. I watched with guilty pleasure as she took a spoonful of the French chef's specially prepared asparagus soup and nearly spit it out. "Something is wrong," she hissed at the mortified chef. "It's sweet?" The poor man nearly had a coronary trying to figure out what had happened. I just sipped my wine, hiding a smirk. Petty? Yes. Satisfying? Immensely. The little tragedies kept coming. The mansion's sprinkler system mysteriously turned on during a garden party, drenching the ladies of New York high society and their Hermes bags. Joseph's email account, accidentally, forwarded a crude joke about a rival developer to the entire executive board, including the rival himself. And on one particularly inspired occasion, Eleanor's Porsche keys vanished during a dinner, only to be found hours later at the bottom of the ornamental garden fountain. They must have fallen out when you were admiring the koi, I suggested innocently, as she stared furiously at the waterlogged keys that would surely fry the electronic fob. Each small victory fueled my confidence, my determination. Jessica started to look at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You're having a little too much fun with this," she commented as we reviewed the collected documents. "This isn't fun," I retorted, organizing the evidence into pink folders, a little taunt for when Eleanor would eventually see them. "This is justice." But secretly, she was right. There was something addictive about turning the tables, about seeing the subtle panic in Eleanor's eyes as yet another thing went wrong, about watching Joseph scramble to understand the chaos unfolding around him. After years of being a pawn, I had finally learned how to play the game. And God forgive me, I was loving every second of it. There was only a week left until the main event when I discovered, by sheer accident, that Eleanor was planning something equally devastating for me. I was in the mansion's kitchen, helping organize a Sunday brunch, Reed pretending to help while actually scouting for more documents, when I overheard Eleanor on the phone in the next room. "The post-nuptial agreement is ready," she was saying in a low voice. "We'll present it at their anniversary dinner as a formality. If she refuses to sign, we already have the dossier prepared to completely discredit her." I froze, the pitcher of orange juice suspended in midair. Our wedding anniversary? That was in exactly 10 days. An emergency visit to Peter's apartment revealed that Eleanor had hired a private investigator to tail me for the past few weeks, the exact same period I'd been gathering evidence against her family. "She has photos of you entering strange places, meeting with suspicious people, which is to say, us," Jessica explained, her face pale as she showed me the files Peter had managed to intercept. "If this gets out, you could be facing disbarment, Marina. You could lose your license to practice law." The irony was suffocating. While I was investigating Eleanor, she was investigating me right back. It was a race against time, and someone had just hit the fast-forward button. Our original plan was to make our move during the company's holiday party, a month from now. Suddenly, we had to pull everything forward, before my anniversary. "Is it even possible?" I asked Peter, who was typing furiously. "Technically, yes, but it'll be risky," he answered, his eyes glued to the screen. "We'll have to bypass some security checks." Jessica bit her lip, worried. "If we get caught?" "We won't," I interrupted, with a certainty I didn't know I possessed. I had spent months being cautious, meticulously planning every single step. Now, it was time to be bold. Eleanor's 65th birthday was in 3 days, a massive gala at the most exclusive hotel in New York City. It was our chance, and likely our only one. I exchanged determined looks with my small team of co-conspirators. Project Phoenix had just been given a new deadline. The Pierre Hotel, on the edge of Central Park, was unrecognizable, having been transformed into a movie-set fantasy for Eleanor's birthday. Extravagant floral arrangements, French champagne flowing like water, and a guest list that included half the city's judiciary, a third of the state's political players, and every real estate mogul who mattered. I had spent the entire morning at the city's most expensive salon, where I was scraped, polished, and painted into a more glamorous version of myself. The dress? That indecently red one I'd bought on impulse, paired with heels high enough to give me a privileged view over the top of Eleanor's head. For the first time, I wasn't trying to fit into the sterling mold, and paradoxically, I had never felt more powerful. "You look different," Joseph commented when he saw me, his eyes running over the dress with appreciation. For the first time in months, I saw a genuine spark of interest in his gaze. "Too late, darling." "I wanted to live up to the occasion," I replied, applying another coat of red lipstick. What he didn't know was that I had spent the previous afternoon with Jessica and Peter, finalizing every detail of our plan. A technical glitch in the projection system during the main speech, a flash drive loaded with curated documents, and the pièce de résistance, perfect timing for the arrival of guests who were most definitely not on the official list. Eleanor greeted me with that plastic smile as we entered the ballroom. "Marina, dear, you look so bold," she commented, her tone making it clear that bold was not a compliment. I smiled sweetly. "I learned from the best, Eleanor." I squeezed her bony shoulders in a calculated hug, feeling her stiffen at my touch. Over her shoulder, I made eye contact with the audio-visual technician, actually a friend of Peter's, planted for the evening. He gave a subtle nod, confirming everything was in place. The party had just begun, but I could already taste victory, and it was sweeter than any champagne. The moment arrived after the main course when the master of ceremonies announced it was time for speeches. Arthur went first, delivering a toast obviously written by an aide, as I doubt he could quote Winston Churchill on his own. Then it was Joseph's turn, offering a generic tribute that could have been for any mother on any occasion. Just as it seemed the speeches were over, I stood up abruptly, champagne flute in hand. "I'd also like to say a few words," I announced, making my way to the small stage. I saw the flash of panic in Eleanor's eyes. The inconvenient daughter-in-law was not on the program. "Family is everything, isn't it?" I began, smiling out at the 200 distinguished guests. "Especially a family like the Sterlings, who have built a true empire." I took a dramatic sip of champagne, buying the technician a moment to cue up my surprise. When I joined this family, I learned such important values, like loyalty, transparency, and of course, the importance of meticulous record-keeping. At that moment, the house lights dimmed and the giant screen behind me flickered to life. "I've prepared a little video tribute to my dear mother-in-law," I announced, just as the first image appeared. A contract with forged signatures, highlighted in blood red. The silence that fell over the ballroom was almost absolute. Slide by slide, I methodically exposed every scheme, every bribe, every fraudulent tax filing. "As a lawyer," I continued calmly, as horror dawned on Eleanor's face, "I've always admired her attention to detail." The screen showed a ledger of off-the-books payments to city officials, complete with names and amounts, and her ability to maintain strategic relationships. Photos of secret meetings with politicians currently under federal investigation appeared. But most of all, I concluded, as the ballroom doors swung open to admit men in dark suits with federal badges, I admired her confidence that she would never, ever get caught. I smiled, raising my glass toward a now petrified Eleanor. "Here's to you, Eleanor. May you always get exactly what you deserve." The pandemonium that erupted was worthy of a season finale. FBI and IRS agents moved through the room as guests scrambled to get out of the way, or in some cases, out of the building. "Marina, what have you done?" Joseph screamed, his face a mask of confusion and betrayal. I ignored him, my eyes locked on Eleanor, who seemed to have aged a decade in the last 10 minutes. She rose slowly, unsteadily, pointing an accusing finger at me. You... The words failed her, as if no insult could possibly suffice. "Far too naive," I suggested sweetly, repeating the words I had read in that fateful email. "I think you underestimated this daughter-in-law, don't you?" The agents closed in, presenting a warrant to Eleanor and Arthur. Joseph was escorted away for questioning. Amid the confusion, no one noticed as I approached Eleanor while an agent was informing her of her Miranda rights. "You know what your biggest mistake was?" I whispered, for her ears only. "Canceling my party. Let's just say, it gave me a lot of free time to plan my own celebration." As the Sterlings were discreetly escorted from their own party, the irony, right? I surveyed the scene with a strange sense of calm. I took one last sip of champagne, placed the flute on a passing tray, and walked serenely toward the service exit. No one paid any attention to the quiet daughter-in-law slipping out through the kitchen, where a town car was already waiting. Inside, I kicked off the killer heels, let out a long, shuddering sigh, and sent a single text to Jessica. "The Phoenix has taken flight." The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror, curious about my smile. "Where to, ma'am?" "JFK International," I replied, feeling the weight of the last 8 months finally lift from my shoulders. "I have a flight to London in 3 hours." Orchestrating an international escape while maintaining the facade of a devoted wife is much harder than it looks in the movies. For weeks, I had been wiring small amounts of money to an offshore account, preparing travel documents under a slightly different name. Thank you, Peter, for your friend who specializes in alternative identities. And packing a go bag that was hidden in a false bottom of the linen closet, a place I was certain Joseph would never look, as I doubt he even knew where we kept the towels. My flight to London was scheduled for 1:20 a.m., the perfect time for a person who wants to vanish without drawing attention. At the airport, I almost missed my flight because I stopped to buy chocolates at a duty-free shop. Don't judge me. If you were fleeing the country after systematically destroying your evil mother-in-law's empire, you'd also want an emergency supply of endorphins in the form of Belgian truffles. Besides, I figured it would look far too suspicious if I didn't buy anything, as if I were in a hurry, which I was, but no one needed to know that. Sitting in the departure lounge, watching the planes on the tarmac, I had a fleeting moment of doubt. Had I really just detonated the life I had spent years building? Was I sure I wanted to go through with this? My phone buzzed. A news alert from my lawyer, confirming the fallout from the party was already hitting the headlines. Sterling Empire under investigation. Massive corruption scheme revealed at birthday gala. It was too late to turn back now. I took a deep breath, clutched my passport, and sent one last text before boarding. Now this is a party. Ironically, it was the party I'd always wanted, and the victory was far sweeter than any birthday cake. Of all the places in England I could have hidden, I chose Rye, a small, historic coastal town in East Sussex. And why? Because it was just a couple of hours from London, the very city where Arthur Sterling kept his other family. The poetic justice was too delicious to resist. I rented a small flat overlooking the English Channel under my new name, Marie Simmons. Not very creative, I know, but when you're on the run, simplicity is key. My routine quickly became unrecognizable. I woke up to the sound of seagulls, had coffee at a local bakery where everyone already knew my fake name, and spent hours walking on the beach. There were no 7 a.m. meetings, no high heels crushing my toes, no disapproving glares from my mother-in-law. The workaholic Marina from New York would have found this life boring. Marie from Rye found it liberating. The most surprising thing? I discovered that simplicity brought me more happiness than all the dinners at Daniel and all the Prada bags the Sterlings had deemed essential to life. I started frequenting a charming cafe near the harbor where I'd open my laptop each morning to work on what had become my new project, a book. How to Topple an Empire in 10 Simple Steps, a Desperate Daughter-in-Law's Guide. A working title, of course. I changed the names, places, and identifying details just enough to avoid a lawsuit, but the core of the story remained. My editor in London, yes, I landed a book deal in record time, said the manuscript had bestseller potential. "It's like The Devil Wears Prada meets The Firm," he explained enthusiastically. "The public will devour it. Who knew my revenge wouldn't just set me free, but also turn me into a writer? Life has a peculiar sense of humor, doesn't it? The universe loves a good coincidence, or, as I prefer to see it, a poetic twist." 6 months into my self-imposed exile, I was buying fresh fish at the local market when I heard a familiar American accent arguing about the price of cod. I froze, holding a sea base like a protective shield. 10 feet away, with his back to me, stood none other than Arthur Sterling, my illustrious ex-father-in-law and, like me, an international fugitive. "Are you from the States?" I asked, approaching cautiously, wearing sunglasses and a hat. Yes, my disguise was basic, but surprisingly effective. He turned, not recognizing me at first with my new haircut and casual style. "Yes, from New York," he replied politely. "You too?" I nodded and suggested we get a coffee. An hour later, we were sitting on a seaside terrace, and I finally took off my glasses. The recognition in his eyes was instant, followed by something completely unexpected. Relief. "Marina! Thank God it's you. I thought you were with the feds." Arthur looked 10 years older and infinitely more human without his expensive suits and air of superiority. What followed was the most surreal conversation of my life. I always knew about Eleanor and her schemes, he confessed, watching the gulls over the water. Why do you think I spent the last 20 years on business trips? He made air quotes with his fingers. I was just waiting for the right moment to expose her, but you were faster and smarter. He smiled, raising his coffee cup in a silent toast to my audacity. Following the developments back in the States was like watching a prestige HBO drama. Every day brought a new twist in the Sterling scandal, as the media had dubbed it. We had a secure communication channel set up with Jessica, who sent me encrypted updates. Eleanor's negotiating a plea deal, one message read. She's trying to pin everything on Arthur and the outside consultants. It was a classic Eleanor move, always protecting herself, no matter who had to be sacrificed in the process. Joseph, it seemed, was having a full-blown media meltdown. He had tried to contact me in every conceivable way, emails, texts. He even hired a private investigator, whom Jessica promptly identified and sent on a wild goose chase. In one particularly pathetic television interview, he actually wept on camera, claiming he had no idea about the extent of the crimes and that he was desperately searching for his beloved missing wife. I nearly choked on my morning tea when I saw the clip. Was this the same man who couldn't remember our anniversary without a calendar alert? Suddenly, I was the great love of his life? A little too late for that, darling. The most surreal part of it all was how the media had transformed me into an unlikely feminist folk hero, the lawyer who toppled a corrupt empire. Law blogs analyzed my legal strategy, true crime podcasts debated my motives, and a Netflix docuseries was already in pre-production. You've become an icon, Jessica wrote. There are law students wearing pins that say, WWHD, what would Marina do? I laughed until I cried at that. If only they knew that many of my key decisions were made on pure impulse, with a glass of wine in one hand while I was wearing fuzzy unicorn slippers. Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear ridiculous pajamas and plot revenge over a pint of Ben & Jerry's. After a year and 2 months of living as Marie Simmons, I decided it was time for Marina Veloso to resurface. I never did take the Sterling name, to Eleanor's eternal disgust. My book was about to be published internationally. My new look, shorter hair, a few blonde highlights, a more relaxed style, had become my true identity. And most surprisingly of all, I had a new business partner. Yes, Arthur Sterling, the man who had spent decades turning a blind eye to the corruption around him, had become my improbable ally. Our return to the United States was timed for maximum impact. We called a press conference at the Pierre, the very same hotel where the fateful birthday party had taken place. Journalists were packed shoulder to shoulder, cameras flashing as I walked to the podium with Arthur a few steps behind me. Good morning, I began, adjusting the microphone. My name is Marina Veloso, and I'm here today to announce the rebirth of Sterling Enterprises as Phoenix Holdings. I smiled at the dozens of gobsmacked reporters. Yes, I'm back, and yes, I've brought some changes. The next day's headlines were priceless. The Phoenix and the Patriarch, ex-daughter-in-law and father-in-law, returned to rebuild an empire. 2 days later, Joseph contacted me, begging for a meeting. I agreed, choosing a neutral cafe in Soho, public enough to prevent a scene, but busy enough to afford us a degree of privacy. He looked like he had aged a decade, with dark circles under his eyes and the beginnings of gray at his temples. Marina, I didn't know about everything, were his first words. My mother hid things from me, too. Of course she did, Joseph. Eternally Mommy's little boy, never responsible for anything. We could try again, he suggested, his eyes pleading. I still love you. I took a slow sip of my cappuccino, observing him calmly. Do you know the difference between us, Joseph? I grew up. I left enough cash on the table to cover both our drinks. Oh, and I'll have the divorce papers sent over tomorrow. This time, try reading them before you sign. With a portion of the money recovered from the offshore accounts, all legally through meticulously drafted settlement agreements, I established the Fresh Start Initiative, a foundation providing legal aid to women who were victims of abusive relationships and financial fraud. Ironically, one of the first people to seek our help was Patricia. Yes, the Patricia. Apparently, after the scandal broke, Joseph had cut her loose, and she discovered He had used her name in various schemes without her full knowledge. I knew about some of it, she confessed at our first meeting, her eyes downcast. But not the scale of it. He manipulated me too. In a move that I'm sure would make Eleanor writhe in her minimum security prison, I converted the meatpacking district condo Joseph had used for his affairs into the Foundation's headquarters. Seeing that space, once a scene of betrayal, now filled with women working together to rebuild their lives, was the very definition of poetic justice. And Patricia? After she completed her court-mandated community service, I offered her a job as our administrative coordinator. "Are you serious?" she asked, incredulous. "After everything?" I shrugged. "Everyone deserves a second chance. Except Eleanor, of course." We laughed together, the tension of our strange past finally dissolving. Exactly 1 year after the scandal, I finally celebrated my birthday, with an extravagant party, just like the one Eleanor had canceled. Same venue, same caterer, same lawyer's briefcase cake, which, by the way, was delicious. The only difference? The guests. Not a sterling in sight, except for Arthur, who now went by his mother's maiden name. In the middle of the party, as the lights dimmed for happy birthday, I looked around the room, at Jessica, Peter, Anthony, and all the others who had helped me on this insane journey, and felt a wave of gratitude so intense it almost brought me to tears. "Make a wish!" someone shouted as the cake was brought out. I closed my eyes, smiled, and didn't have to wish for a single thing. For the first time in my life, I already had everything I wanted. If you had told me 3 years ago that I would be accepting the Entrepreneur of the Year award from Forbes magazine, wearing a stunning red gown in my new penthouse on the Upper East Side, ironically, just 3 blocks from the old Sterling mansion, I probably would have laughed in your face. But life has a peculiar sense of humor. There I was, clinking glasses with friends and colleagues, celebrating the success of Phoenix Holdings, now recognized as one of the most ethical and innovative development firms in the country. The most surprising thing in my new life? My relationship with Michael, an English chef I met during my exile in Rye. On our first date, he served me the soggiest fish and chips of my life, and after 2 glasses of Sauvignon Blanc, I was candid enough to tell him so. Instead of being offended, he pulled up a chair and asked for specific notes on what was wrong with the batter. 3 hours later, we were still talking, no longer about fried fish, but about books, travel, and second chances. He now runs a critically acclaimed restaurant in Soho, earning rave reviews from the New York Times, and surprises me every morning with coffee in bed and a kiss on the forehead. Who needs Prince Charming when you can have an English chef with a bit of stubble and hands that work magic in the kitchen and, well, you get the picture. The biggest irony? I started playing golf and discovered I actually loved it. After so many disastrous attempts to please Eleanor, I finally found my own swing. It's like life, Arthur, who had become a sort of unlikely mentor, once told me. You have to find your own grip, not just copy someone else's. Cheesy golf course philosophy? Maybe. But it worked. And best of all, I finally stopped breaking things. Well, for the most part. There were still occasional accidents, usually involving animated conversations and glasses of wine. Some things never completely change, and I'm okay with that. On my birthday, a strange envelope arrived with no return address. The courier seemed confused, as if he wasn't entirely sure of its origin. Inside, I found a handwritten letter on expensive stationery in a perfect looping script I would recognize anywhere. Eleanor. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read. Marina, the years bring wisdom, even if it arrives late. I made mistakes I cannot undo. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I admire your courage, a quality I never possessed. If I could go back. The rest was predictable. Belated regret, veiled pleas for reconciliation, a masterclass in subtle emotional manipulation. Tucked in with the letter was the original receipt for the lawyer's briefcase cake, the one that was never delivered for my canceled party. Was it a peace offering? A final admission of guilt? Perhaps. Or perhaps it was just one more calculated move. With Eleanor, you could never be certain. I stared at the papers for a long moment, feeling the full weight of the past few years. Then, I calmly walked over to the fireplace in my penthouse, tossed everything inside, and watched the flames consume the last artifact of my former life. "What was that?" Michael asked, walking into the room with 2 flutes of champagne. "Just some old trash," I replied, accepting the glass and kissing him. The doorbell rang. The first guests for my birthday party were arriving. This time, it was an intimate celebration, with only the people who genuinely loved me. As everyone settled in, I raised my glass for a toast. "To new beginnings," I said, smiling at the faces around me, "and to the lessons we learn along the way." Michael squeezed my hand under the table, and I felt the quiet certainty of someone who has finally found her place in the world. "If you could go back in time, would you change anything?" The question came from a journalist from Vanity Fair during an interview about my new book, which had been on the bestseller list for 6 straight weeks. I paused, considering it carefully. The easy answer would be, no, I wouldn't change a thing. The kind of pat response that plays well in interviews. But the truth, as always, was more complex. "I might have chosen a smaller cake," I said finally, drawing a surprised laugh from the journalist. "Or maybe a better husband, but I definitely wouldn't change my mother-in-law. After all, without her, I never would have discovered what I was truly capable of." Later that night, in the privacy of my apartment after Michael had fallen asleep, I typed out a short message. It was to a number I had saved for years, even though I knew I would probably never use it. "Thank you for canceling my party. It was the best gift you could have ever given me." I hesitated before hitting send. Was it petty? Unnecessary? Probably. But it was also true. The phone screen glowed with the delivered confirmation, and I pictured Eleanor in her now half-empty mansion, receiving a text from an unknown number. I put the phone down and walked to the window, looking out at the glittering lights of New York City. The city that had nearly swallowed me whole now looked different. Still chaotic, still unforgiving, but somehow more mine than it had ever been. I smiled at my reflection in the glass, a woman I wouldn't have recognized 3 years ago. Stronger, happier, more myself. Sometimes you have to lose a party to find your own celebration. And believe me, mine was just getting started.